I sat at my desk, the afternoon sun spilling over the city's skyline through the apartment window. The silk of my blouse felt smooth against my skin, but it couldn't soothe the echo of my father's laughter, the one that had cut deeper than any insult I'd ever known. "You're old enough to pay rent or get out." He had said it at my graduation dinner, leaning back in his chair, smirk plastered across his face like he'd delivered some clever punchline. The phone buzzed on my desk, and I picked it up, fingers brushing against the leather-bound notebook that held reminders of every small triumph I'd achieved since that night. A message from my mother glowed on the screen. "Can you come home this weekend? Your father wants to see you." I paused. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to let him stew in the ignorance of his own words. But another part, the part that had fought through late nights, unpaid bills, and self-doubt, curled in excitement at the thought of finally showing him who I had become. I inhaled deeply, the scent of coffee from the corner cafe drifting through the window, and smiled quietly. He thought I was still the same girl he had mocked. He had no idea. I packed my bag, zipped my leather laptop case, and promised myself I'd step into that house tomorrow as the woman he'd never expected me to be. The memory hit me like a sudden gust of wind. Graduation night. The smell of my mother's perfume, the polished silverware, and the soft hum of polite conversation filled the dining room. I had spent weeks planning this evening, envisioning proud smiles and congratulations. Instead, I got Dad. "You're old enough to pay rent or get out." He had laughed, leaning back in his chair, the creases around his eyes deepening with amusement. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, as the room tilted, my pride collapsing. My hands shook beneath the table, the lump in my throat swallowing the words I'd been rehearsing for months. Mom's eyes darted nervously between us, and I realized she would say nothing. My siblings chuckled awkwardly, sensing the tension but too young or too polite to intervene. I wanted to disappear, to melt into the fine china and the floral centerpiece and vanish completely. Then, from the corner of my mind, I remembered Aunt Clara. She had called me earlier that day, her voice warm and steady over the phone. "Sophia," she had said, my childhood nickname, "never let anyone define your worth. You are capable of more than they can imagine. One day, they'll see, and they'll regret not believing in you." The words felt like a fragile lifeline. I gripped my napkin, imagining a world beyond this dinner, a life where my success wasn't measured by Dad's dismissive smirk. The thought gave me courage. I could leave. I could carve my own path, even if it meant walking alone. That night, I quietly excused myself after dessert, mumbling something about needing fresh air. The cool night air outside felt like freedom wrapping around my shoulders. I called a friend, secured a small apartment, and began scribbling plans in a notebook. Every idea felt monumental, every step terrifying, but necessary. It was the first real act of independence in my life, the night I decided I would never again let someone else dictate my value. That laughter, that cruel joke at my expense, became the fuel I needed to push myself further than I ever imagined possible. I didn't look back. The first months in my tiny apartment were nothing like the dinner halls or polished offices I had dreamed of. The peeling paint on the walls, the hum of the radiator, and the faint scent of last night's takeout were my constant companions. But they were mine. Every choice, every late night, every dollar stretched was a brick in the foundation of the life I was building. I had taken Aunt Clara's advice to heart. I began freelancing, first small projects that barely cover the rent. Then came networking events, quiet evenings typing away on my laptop until my fingers ached. I remember the sting of rejection emails, the awkward handshakes with clients who doubted my age, my ambition, my ability. I cried more than I cared to admit, curled up on my couch with a cup of cheap instant coffee. But slowly, the pieces started to fit together. It was during one of these nights that I met Daniel Reeves, a seasoned marketing consultant who saw more than a nervous 22-year-old typing in a cramped apartment. "You've got vision," he had said, leaning over my laptop. "Not many your age do. Let me show you how to turn that into results." With his mentorship, I learned to navigate the business world, contracts, client management, digital campaigns. My confidence grew alongside my portfolio. My first major client, a small but ambitious startup, signed on after a week of intense pitches. I still remember the moment I deposited that first sizable check into my account. I whispered to myself, I'm doing this. I'm really doing this. I kept my progress a secret from my family. Social media offered only glimpses, photos of my city walks, casual brunches, but nothing to betray the truth of my growing empire. I didn't need validation from the people who had doubted me. Every milestone was a quiet victory, a testament to the life I was creating from scratch. By the end of the year, I had moved into a loft in a better part of the city, decorated modestly but tastefully. The apartment smelled of fresh linen and coffee. The bookshelves were lined with industry guides, novels, and mementos from friends who had supported me along the way. I had earned enough to invest in my own business, hire a small team, and even start a fund for young women who, like me, needed a push toward independence. And yet, every time I received a call from home, I felt that familiar twinge of apprehension. The memory of Dad's laughter was never far away. But now it was tempered with pride. One day, they would see. One day, the little girl they had underestimated would step out from the shadows, and they would have to acknowledge her. Until then, I thrived in the quiet, savoring every triumph without fanfare, every victory without audience. My independence was mine alone, built from sweat, tears, and a stubborn refusal to be defined by anyone else's expectations. The weekend arrived faster than I expected. The ride back to my childhood neighborhood brought a flood of memories: the creaking sidewalk, the old oak tree in front of our house, the faint smell of Dad's cologne lingering in the hallways. My stomach fluttered, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was anticipation. When I walked through the front door, the house smelled exactly the same, a mix of baked bread, polished wood, and the faint tang of cleaning products. Dad was in the living room, lounging in his recliner, a smug grin on his face, as if he were already imagining the version of me he expected, flustered, quiet, and unsuccessful. Finally decided to show up, huh? He asked, voice dripping with sarcasm. I smiled, letting the silence stretch a beat longer than he expected. I did, I said softly, yet every word carried authority. Mom was behind him, eyebrows raised, as if sensing that something had shifted. My younger brother, Ethan, sat cross-legged on the couch, scrolling on his phone, unaware that the woman he had always teased was about to redefine him. I led them into the dining room, not the one where the graduation dinner had unfolded, but the one I had claimed as my presentation room, the space where I kept awards, framed letters of recognition, and my laptop open to client portfolios. I gestured casually toward the table. I thought I'd show you a few things I've been working on. Dad's smirk faltered slightly, but he remained seated, arms crossed. I clicked through my presentation. Digital campaigns I had led, clients I had signed, contracts I had negotiated. Photographs of my office, my team, letters from satisfied clients. All quietly impressive. Their jaws tightened as they realized this was not some small, temporary gig. Then came the final slide, my company's logo and financial growth chart. I held their gaze. This, I said, is what I've built. On my own. Without anyone here believing I could do it. Mom gasped softly. Ethan's phone fell to the floor. And Dad? He leaned forward, eyes wide, mouth slightly open, the arrogance completely stripped away. For the first time, I saw him speechless. I own my business. I've hired a team. I've invested, expanded, and even started mentoring other young women. Everything you thought I couldn't do, I did. My voice was calm, steady, but laced with the thrill of vindication. The silence in the room was almost tangible. I could feel the weight of every doubt, every laugh, every dismissive comment hanging in the air. I let it linger for a moment longer, letting them absorb it fully. Finally, Dad muttered, I didn't expect. I cut him off gently, but firmly. You don't have to understand. But I want you to know this. The girl you laughed at that night, she's the woman standing here today. And she won't ever be underestimated again. The The room shifted. I saw shame, awe, and disbelief in their eyes, but more importantly, I felt a sense of completion. The little girl who had left that graduation dinner humiliated had returned as a force of her own making, fully visible, fully unstoppable. After the initial shock, the room was quiet, and I felt the shift. Finally, the power was mine. Dad's smugness had vanished, replaced by something tentative, like a man stepping into unfamiliar territory. Mom looked at me with a mix of worry and hope, while Ethan still seemed frozen, processing that the sister he teased was untouchable in her own right. I leaned against the table, folding my arms comfortably. "We need to have a conversation," I said, calm but deliberate. "I'm not here to punish anyone, but I am here to set the terms for how we move forward." Dad swallowed, clearly unused to being in this position. I continued. "First, respect. Not just me, but the boundaries I've built for myself. I won't tolerate dismissive comments, sarcasm, or anything that undermines what I've worked for." Mom nodded slightly, relieved. I turned to Ethan. "And you, little brother, will treat me as the equal I've earned the right to be. No more jokes about my abilities, no more assumptions about my life. If you want to be part of it, you have to contribute positively, not tear anyone down." I could see the tension in Dad's shoulders, so I softened my tone. "I care about you. I care about this family. But I also care about myself. So here's the deal. If you want to see me, support me, or even learn from me, you'll need to do a few things." I listed the conditions carefully, each tied to personal growth and healing. Dad needed to acknowledge his past dismissiveness and commit to listening rather than criticizing. Mom needed to support her own dreams, not just facilitate ours. And Ethan, he needed to respect boundaries, understand the value of independence, and pursue his own goals without leaning on anyone's labor or approval. I didn't speak in threats. I spoke in terms of possibility. "I'm not giving ultimatums out of spite," I said. "I'm doing this because we all need to grow. I've learned the hard way that life is too short to let old patterns repeat. We can rebuild, but it has to be on new terms." The room was silent again, but this time it was different. The energy wasn't fear or shock, it was reflection. I could see the gears turning in their heads, the recognition that they had underestimated me for far too long. For the first time, I felt an incredible mix of relief and pride. This wasn't just about proving them wrong, it was about establishing a new standard. One that allowed love, respect, and accountability to coexist. I straightened, smoothing the fabric of my blouse, and added quietly, "I'm giving you the chance to be part of my life, but only if you meet me here. On equal footing. On honest terms. That's non-negotiable." And in that moment, I realized that power didn't have to come from revenge. It came from clarity, courage, and the refusal to accept anything less than what I deserved. The days and weeks after that confrontation were quieter, but they carried a different energy, one of tentative respect and slow change. Dad began listening more than speaking, sometimes asking questions about my work or the people I mentored. Mom started taking classes she had always postponed, rediscovering the things that made her feel alive. Even Ethan, in his own awkward way, showed curiosity about building something meaningful for himself rather than leaning on anyone else. I watched it all from my apartment, the sunlight spilling over my bookshelves and laptop, the same small corner where I had started this journey. Each change in them reminded me of how far I had come. The little girl humiliated at her graduation dinner had become a woman who could not only survive but thrive and help others do the same. I reached for Aunt Clara's old bracelet, the one she had given me the night before graduation, a delicate chain of silver and rose quartz. I held it in my hand, remembering her words, "Never let anyone define your worth." The phrase had been a whisper then, but now it was a mantra etched into my very being. The bracelet caught the morning light, and I realized something profound. Power wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about making them feel small. It was about owning my journey, setting boundaries, and living fully in my truth. Every step I had taken, from leaving that dinner to building my company, had been about self-respect, courage, and the quiet satisfaction of proving to myself, not anyone else, that I could. That evening, I returned to the house once more, not to prove anything, but to celebrate the subtle victories. We laughed over dinner, tentative but genuine, and I saw glimmers of the family I had always hoped we could be, one built on honesty, respect, and love, without old patterns shadowing every word. As I left, walking back to my apartment, the city lights reflecting in the windows, I felt a sense of closure that no graduation ceremony could ever have given me. I had left that little girl behind long ago. The woman walking now was fearless, independent, and unshakably proud. I smiled to myself and whispered, almost to the night air, I am not defined by anyone else's laughter. I am the architect of my own life, and I will never apologize for it. And in that moment, I truly understood. The freedom I had fought for was mine, and it was beautiful.